Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018, 10:02. Story 1, The Sleeping Beauty Effect. My name is Robert, Dr. Robert Maxwell. I have worked in St. Anthony's Institution for the Mentally Unstable for almost 15 years now, and I have decided to speak out about the events which have taken place in this godforsaken excuse for a hospital. I have never been a pushover by any means, or a softie. I always stood up for myself, and I always stood up for what was right in the name of science, but recently some of the experiments that have gone on here have purely been for the enjoyment of some very sick and twisted owners and managers. Let me start from the beginning. December 2000. This is when I was stationed in St. Anthony's for about 2 years. Everything seemed rather normal up until now. Every day I'd go room to room administrating medication and giving patients some light counseling and asked them how they were feeling, etc. I'd also always try to tell them a few jokes to help them through their day. Experiments had taken place, for example showing a patient with memory issues and psychosis certain pictures and patterns while playing a genre of music from their childhood to see if their minds would pick up particular things from the methods and rewire in some sense. These experiments never worked. It wasn't until around Christmas time that the experiments changed. There was one doctor in particular, Reginald Smith, the administrator of all the dosages of medication and the correctional officer in the hospital. Weird mix of duties, I know. He never really spoke much, but when he did it was with hatred and bitterness towards the patients. It was as if they had all done something that enraged him, just by being mentally damaged. I'd often see scars appear on the patients on my floor's arms, and I'd automatically presume they were from self-harming, so I would take them to Dr. Smith for an evaluation. I only noticed something wasn't right when they were coming back from his room paler and trembling more than ever. October 2003. Dr. Smith began staying back after hours to carry out private experiments on the subjects. How he wasn't questioned on it I'll never know. He'd sometimes tell everyone he's locking up, and I'd come in the next day to see him in the same clothes with a sick grin on his face walking out of his office. I wanted to know what he was doing to the patients as they were getting sicker and more mentally unstable by the day. I called him out on it one day and I said I wanted to be a part of the experiments. He told me he had finished his list of tests, but he needed a volunteer to try out a new experiment called the Sleeping Beauty. Even the sound of this sent shivers from my feet to the tip of my balding head. I hesitantly agreed to take part in it. It started with a series of mini experiments which ranged from blood tests, to nerve reaction therapy, to even some electric shock therapy. All of which I was told was successful on the subject, and I was told to take down notes, and regardless of how the subjects reacted I was to write patient hashes improving rapidly due to test 35 etc. That's when the actual testing started. Dr. Smith explained to me that the patients would be placed in a sensory deprivation tank, i.e. all their senses would be virtually removed, and they would be alone with their minds so as then we could read them better. A sedative would be administered through a tubing system and they would be put to sleep. I was told they would feel no pain, rather they would feel the most relaxed in years. We carried this out on many subjects night after night, even though they mostly begged and pleaded for us not to put them back in the tank. One patient even went to the extremes of scratching his eyes out and biting off his tongue to make us stop. He still went in the tank too. September 2006. I had been involved in the testing and note-taking of subjects for almost 3 years now. All the patients who we've tested virtually became unresponsive after a couple of months, but the tests still continued and advanced around the hospital, eventually testing every patient in the place. We even expanded to the woman's ward, started testing them too. And I'd lie if I said I wasn't starting to enjoy it a little bit. I don't know what it was, the screams before they went in, the convulsions and their eyes rolling to the back of their head, or them begging for their mothers and fathers when they got out. There was just something. August 2009, I didn't know what kind of effect Dr. Smith was having on me. He was making me feel so sinister and evil, and I hated it, or I loved it. I didn't know how to feel about anything. Until now he told me the reason they were flipping out is because they were becoming in touch with their sane selves again and they didn't know how to react. He constantly told me we had to find the golden ticket patient who would emerge from the water and be completely cured of all their mental problems. Then they would act as the antidote in a sense. I wasn't sure exactly how it would work, and I couldn't help but think it was some sort of sick game, but he was the smartest doctor in the institution after all, so I had to put some sort of trust in him. I was beginning to have nightmares of the subjects and I needed some justice. I managed to get into Dr. Smith's office when he was out on a medication run and I got into his files. I found something that changed my outlook on the whole situation entirely. It read infectio animi, which meant infection of the mind in Latin. I remember this from school. It was a file about a technique where someone was injected with a harmless in the long term, acidic substance mixed with a type of morphine which rendered the subject paralyzed but feeling as though they were being cooked from the inside out. It also had a strong psychoactive substance in it which made every minute that went by feel like an hour. But what about the water? I then went on to read that if placed in a tub of pink sea salt, the substance injected into them will react through the skin and make the subject feel as though they are having a heart attack and that their lungs have completely closed. I was shocked as I realized we had some patients in this thing for up to 6 hours at a time. January 2013, present day. We have been still carrying out experiments, Dr. Smith and I called him out on what I found in his files years ago and he informed me of all the wonders of ancient dark torture. I can't explain why I love this so much and it eats away at me every day, but I just can't stop. As soon as a worried son or mother delivers the next victim to our little house of fun, me and Smith are straight down to the experimentation room, with the excuse of an opening evaluation every time. We'd have the fuckers completely mentally broken within a week, only writing on their reports that they're getting worse and need to be kept in the hospital for another year, etc., only giving us more time with them to feed on their pain. This will be my final entry. I don't know what I've become. The hospital is being investigated this week. Archive 4418, date the 1st of October 2018, Officer James Higgins. This report is being opened again due to many aspects having been unresolved in the first instance. The events at St. Anthony's Home for the Mentally Unstable took place from approximately 1998 onward until 2013. The allegations were carried out by a Dr. Robert Maxwell, who was found to have schizophrenia and an intense split personality disorder. He created an alter ego who he referred to as Dr. Smith, who he blamed all the corrupt behavior towards the patients on. This man does not and never did exist. Everything Mr. Maxwell has claimed has been done by himself and himself alone. Robert Maxwell has been branded hereby insane and a danger to himself and others and remains in maximum security to be under suicide watch at all times until an evaluation to be held in 3 years. Archive 4418, date the 1st of October 2018, Officer James Higgins, report closed. Story 2, my nephew's imaginary friend is real, and it is terrifying. September 1st, 2:30 p.m. Who is that? I ask while looking at the scribbled lines of my nephew's drawing, as he proudly shows his work of art to me. There appear to be 5 figures in the magic marker drawn picture. 4 of the scribbled lines and circles sit inside a small house. The drawing represents our family, which consists of myself, my sister, and my 5-year-old nephew named Sam. A smaller little line drawing with 2 ears appears to be my cat, Bosco. What catches my attention though, is the figure standing outside of the house. While the other figures appeared colorful and smiling, something was strange about the drawn figure outside of the house. His lines were jet black, his face expressionless with a black hat sitting on top of his head, but what caught my attention was the shade of his eyes, a dark green color. Who is that sitting outside the house, Sam? I asked. That is my friend Mr. Green Eyes. Sam exclaimed. He watches me play from the window. That's cool, little buddy. I replied. I look over to the window of Sam's playroom, nothing sitting outside but hedge bushes with a solid wooden fence sitting behind it. I stand up and walk down the hall to the kitchen where my sister is currently cleaning the stove. Sam has a new friend apparently, a guy in a hat that likes to watch him play from the window. I say to my sister he has an imaginary friend, it sounds like. she replied as she opens the cabinet below the sink. He is still adjusting. I mean, he has been through a lot these past couple of months. I know, he's been through a lot with the move across the country and the separation, I reply. It is just a bit where he watched his father be taken away in handcuffs, then a month later he is living in a new house, a new city, and everything he has known has been uprooted. I shrug and realize that my sister is right. Sam had indeed been through a lot for someone his age. 3 months ago, I got a call from my sister asking me for a place to stay. Her husband, who had always loved his beer, suddenly really started to like it. With that came intense arguments. Those disagreements eventually escalated when one day he decided to try to strangle her. I remember that night answering the phone to the sobs of my sister telling me that her husband was being led out in handcuffs in front of their only son. I told her I had plenty of room in my house, but it was across the country. My sister said the further she was away from him the better. Within a month they were living with me. It was an adjustment, but I did not mind knowing that my sister and my nephew were safe, and had a shelter of their heads. She was right to assume that her son was adjusting and creating an imaginary friend in a new home and city to find a way to cope. I decided to drop the subject, let the kid work through his emotions and be supportive of whatever the two needed from me. After all, it was just a phase. September 25, 12:05 a.m. It was a late night of surfing on the web, reading the news, commenting sporadically on Reddit, and listening to one of my favorite podcasts when I heard a strange noise. Taking off my headphones and listening to the loud yowls coming from somewhere inside the house. I walked downstairs following the noise that led to Sam's playroom. My cat Bosco was sitting on the window, switching between hissing and the weird clicking noise that cats make. I walked up and grabbed him, startling him a bit, but he never took his eyes off from looking outside the window. It was as if he watching something. That is when I realized what my cat was looking at. The bushes in front of the fence were moving. Walking down the hallway and entering the kitchen, I felt a little bit of fear going outside. Something was there, but what could it be? Did my sister's ex-husband figure out where she was? Could it be a robber scouting out our house? Turning on the light to the backyard and stepping out, I look at the bushes, the violent rustling continuing. I moved slowly towards the direction, part as caution and fear. "Who is there? Come out now," I said aloud. I hear no response, but now the bushes are moving even more erratic and violent. "Come out now," I yelled. Building up the courage and picking up the pace of my step, I reach for what is trying to hide in the bush. A loud shriek pierced my ear coming from the bush as I laid my hand on the branches. As I jumped backward, caught off guard by the shriek, a small raccoon made its way from the bushes and quickly ran away. I felt a relief that it was just a wild animal hiding in the bushes. Breathing in to calm my nerves and headed back inside the house. As the door opened, Bosco darted past my feet and into the night. Looking around to make sure the raccoon was long gone, I scanned the area to see if I could find my cat, but to no avail. "Bosco, come back inside," I called out. Waiting at the door to see if by chance my cat would return, I look at the bushes one more time. After a few minutes, I close the door and leave the light on for him. It's not the first time he had escaped to the yard, but he always came back the next day. I was too tired and drained from the experience to keep standing outside yelling his name. I started to walk back to my bedroom when I passed the room where Bosco was sitting in the window. Sam in his pajamas stood frozen in the room gazing through the window. I walk inside the room and kneel down next to Sam to ask, "Why aren't you in bed?" Sam rubbed his eyes and turned his body toward me with his small arms stretched out. Grabbing a hold of him and lifting him up, I take one last look outside. Everything seemed fine now, with no bushes moving or animal in sight. After a moment we headed up the stairs with Sam clutching me tightly. As we entered his room, I could not help but notice more drawings of the family. One caught my attention. It was Sam's imaginary friend, but this time he had a scowl on his face. "Now go back to sleep, Sam," I said as I tucked him in. "But my friend Mr. Green Eyes is outside and wants to play." September 28, 2:15 a.m. The sound of Bosco screaming woke me up. It was a loud hiss and followed by loud screaming. I had tried to get him to come back inside luring with a bowl of food at the back door, but he had never returned. I wondered if he had wandered off the property, however hearing the noises at this time tonight told me differently. It sounded like he was fighting something outside, possibly the raccoon from the other night. As I ran down the stairs, the sounds of my cat were becoming more alarming. It started to sound as if he was in pain. Quickly stepping outside to the backyard, I saw no sign of Bosco, nor anything he could be fighting. It was hauntingly silent in the yard while I searched for any clue of where my cat might be. Walking to the area where the raccoon was spotted yielded no trace of him either. Finally, I decided to walk around the perimeter of the house. Something caught my eye near the window of Sam's playroom. My cat Bosco was lying motionless on the ground. Quickly shoveling Bosco up and rushing inside to lay him on the couch, I turned on the light to look him over. Observing that the cat had no marks, or any sign of blood coming from his body, there might be a chance to save him. In a panic, I ran to my bedroom to dress and retrieve my keys. Picking up the still motionless Bosco and making my way to the car. I fumbled on my phone to find an emergency pet clinic and made my way there. Arriving at the clinic and hastily making my way inside, I looked to the desk person and said, "I need to see someone now, my cat isn't moving, or responding." The desk person quickly escorted me to a room, and I laid Bosco down on the table. After a few moments, the veterinarian came in and looked at my cat lying on the table. After checking his pulse, the vet looked over to me and said, "I am sorry, but your cat is dead. I heard him fighting with something outside, but I don't see any signs on him of blood or wounds." As I watched, the veterinarian pulled out a small light. She shined the light and scanned his body. I observed to see any sign of scratches, bruises, or marks that I may have missed, but nothing appeared. The veterinarian then moved to Bosco's neck and then to his head. "It looks like your cat broke his neck," she replied. "How could my cat possibly break his neck? Could he have possibly chased something up a tree or jumped on the roof of your house? He saw a raccoon outside a couple of nights ago," I answered. The veterinarian nodded and said, "Most likely he spotted the raccoon and chased it up a tree, then accidentally fell." That seemed to be the most likely answer, but something was unsettling to me. Bosco had never done anything like this before. Sure, he was a cat, but I had never seen him climb a tree. As I paid the bill and made arrangements to cremate him, something did not quite sit right about what had happened. I couldn't pinpoint my feeling as I drove home. Pulling into the driveway and looking at the house, the thought of my cat's death left me sad. As I entered the house and peering out the window where the two of us had seen the raccoon, nothing but the night and bushes. I decided to try to get some sleep, but while leaving the room a small drawing laid on the ground. When I picked up the picture, I noticed it was another family drawing, but this one was missing Bosco. September 30, 2018, 8:35 It's time for bed, Sam, I said loudly as I walked down the hallway. As I start making my way down the hall to retrieve Sam, who is loudly trotting around his playroom, I notice that he is whispering lightly. At first, it sounded as if he was talking to himself, but it seemed as if he was holding a conversation. The first thought came to my mind was that my sister was in the room with him. As I reached the outside of the room, I stopped for a brief moment and listened. I did not hear my sister's voice, but Sam, who whispered, "I can't play any more tonight." He continued, "I know you don't like it when I leave, but I have to go to bed." Walking into the room, I watched as Sam's head quickly turned facing me. He seemed shocked that I was listening to his conversation. I looked around the room and looked back at him. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "You made him run away." "Who did I make run away?" "Mr. Green Eyes," Sam shouted as he pointed at the window. The feeling of someone or something, whether imaginary or not, made me feel tense after what happened to Bosco. Something in my head told me to go outside and look around, even if it was to prove myself that Sam's friend was imaginary. "Why don't you head to bed, Sam? Your mom is waiting upstairs to tuck you in," I said. Sam gave me a little bit of a frown but relented and headed towards his bedroom. Heading outside and walking towards the window of Sam's playroom, nothing looked strange as I approached it. A sigh of relief came over me as I realized no one was outside, and Sam's friend was imaginary. That is when I looked down and saw something strange on the ground. The light showed it plainly the closer I got the light. A set of footprints with the toes point toward the window, as if someone was standing there and watching. The tension in my body started to rise as my legs began to feel stiff. Reaching for my phone and dialing the non-emergency number, I requested for a police officer to come as quickly as possible. Someone or something had been outside speaking to my nephew. Kneeling down and looking at footprints, they looked big and deep. Whoever had been looking inside appeared to be large and heavy. After hanging up the phone and thinking of how to explain to my sister that the police are arriving without making her panic, I lift my head up to see that the light to Sam's room is still on strangely. Making my way to the back door of the house, I feel frozen in terror. I don't remember leaving the back door open. Left stunned and with a sinking feeling by the sight of the door being open. Dashing for the door and entering the house, I call out to my sister and my nephew but hear no response. The sound was too quiet, like no one was even in the house. Reaching the stair and looking up to see the light to Sam's room is still on, something is not right. I quickly run to the stairs and scream. "Sam, where are you? Somebody please answer me." I scream again. Entering Sam's bedroom and seeing an empty bed. I look down to see my sister's lifeless body on the floor. Lying flat on her stomach, I rush over to her and check for a pulse, but I feel nothing. She has bruises along her neck as if something had come behind her and attacked. Sobbing uncontrollably at the sight of my sister who looks to have her neck broken. "Sam, please tell me where you are," I yell. Sam still not respond to my screams, and that worried me. Standing back up and I run back to the stairs, running down the hallway checking every room. Every one of them empty. When arriving in the playroom, something is in the corner of my eye. What looks to be a man with a sickly pale white skin is looking directly at me. He is abnormally tall, almost reaching the top of the window. His face has a grin with jagged crooked teeth that are stained brown. The terrifying gaze he gave me from his gruesome eyes, that were a dark green and with black pupils. He pursed his lips for a moment and lifted his finger. I stand frozen as his smile widens and he walks away slowly. As the man walked away from the window, I catch a glimpse of Sam following him innocently with a smile on his face. Running toward the still open back door and outside, they appear nowhere in sight. The wind howls and with a slight creaking sound. When I look to see the back gate to the front yard was now open. Rushing to the front yard and looking about but nothing, not either one. I run to the street desperately looking at both sides of the road, hoping and praying to catch the faintest view of my nephew. As I see the lights of a police car approaching my house, I look hopelessly on as it is too late. As it seems that both my nephew and whatever evil thing lead him away has disappeared into thin air. Story 3, it's my first time camping but things don't seem right out here. 2 days ago I packed for my first camping trip. And even though I've been a little nervous, I was also excited. Camping is in quotations because I know a lot of you won't consider staying in a cabin in the woods to be camping. I get that. But I am a city girl. I was born in one of the largest cities in the world and I've lived there my entire life. The most time I've spent amongst nature has been picnicking in Central Park. So to me, spending 10 days in a secluded cabin in the middle of the woods is basically camping. My boyfriend, Ryder, on the other hand, has been camping his entire life. We met 2 years ago when he first moved to the city from the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. He grew up in the middle of the woods, so for him, city life was the big adjustment. On our first date he told me all about life as a piney. I was taken by his adventurous nature and self-assuredness. He first moved to the city for a construction job, and he misses the quiet of the woods. So I've agreed to a camping trip so I can experience this part of his life that he loves and cherishes. I really love Ryder, and I want to be able to love this part of his lifestyle. But I have to confess that so far, things haven't been comfortable. I don't mean the bugs or the creaky old mattress, which fine, Not my favorite, but I'm not some pansy who can't handle it. There's just some aspects of this whole camping thing that are seriously unnerving me. To start, the cabin he rented is really, seriously remote. We're somewhere in the Catskills and TBH I'm not even really sure exactly where. I let him navigate and drive, and didn't pay much attention. We're about 3 hours out from Brooklyn, that's all I know. The cabin we're staying in is studio style, with a bedroom nook, small kitchenette, a bathroom, and living space. It's the only cabin for miles. He found it on Airbnb for a really good price. When he told me about it, he said we'd have lots of fun with all the extra privacy, and I felt excited by the twinkle in his eye. Yes, we did fuck outside last night, in front of the fire he built, while I laid on my back and stared at the night sky, which looked different than I had ever seen it before. I had no idea how many stars you can see with the naked eye, but what I hadn't considered was how eerie the isolation would feel. What's more, I barely get any signal at all. If this post goes through, it'll be because I'm standing on the left side of the front porch, holding my phone up to the sky, and being granted a miracle by the cell tower gods. Did I mention there's no Wi-Fi? Ryder likes it that way. He loves the whole tiny house, off-the-grid thing. He said we'd have more time to connect without Wi-Fi, but the truth is, he's seemed off since we arrived. The first night was fine. We got here, we unpacked, he built a fire and we roasted some marshmallows and ate dinner. We enjoyed the aforementioned hanky-panky, and then we went to bed early so we could get up to hike the next day. But then something woke us up in the middle of the night. I woke up first, and in my groggy sleepy state I shook Ryder awake. He listened with me to what sounded like a hard scraping on the outside of the wall, where the porch is. It sounded like someone was dragging a rake along the wood, over and over again. My heart was pounding in my chest. We were supposed to be completely alone out here, why would someone be on the porch? I started wishing we had a gun or something to protect us. I can't help but to imagine the worst and my mind was racing. I whispered my fears to Ryder, who hushed me and got out of bed, pulled on his jeans, and crept over to the window. The second he peeked outside, the sound stopped. I was so scared I was holding my breath. Then, to my horror, Ryder opened the front door. Before I could even make a sound to protest, he stepped outside and let the screen door slam behind him. I laid in bed, clutching the blankets to my chest, staring at his silhouette illuminated by the porch light. "There's nothing out here," he said to me. "Come back inside." I pleaded, feeling afraid to even have the door open, but Ryder insisted on taking a look around the property. He instructed me to lock the door behind him before he strutted off the porch. I did as I was told, despite being gripped with fear. I thought he'd be back in a minute at most, but instead I spent the next 20 minutes petrified, straining to listen past the sound of the crickets for any sign of him. I was too afraid to look out the window or open the door. I know I sound like a coward, and maybe I am, but please understand I've never experienced anything like this before in my life. Finally, after the longest 20 minutes of my life, I heard him come up the steps and rap on the door. "It's me," he said, and although it sounded like him, there was a strange huskiness to his voice that I didn't recognize. I opened the door and Ryder came inside, not bothering to glance at me as he headed back to bed. I locked the door and crawled in next to him. "Did you see anything?" "Obviously not," he sounded annoyed. "What do you think that was? Probably just the wind or something." I laughed then, because the notion was so silly I thought he was certainly joking, but the angry look on his face at the sound of my laugh clearly told me he wasn't. "You worry too fucking much, you know that?" He's never spoken to me like this before, and his words honestly shocked me. I didn't know what to say. I felt deeply wounded by his words. I understand that I might be overreacting because I don't understand the wilderness, but I didn't think I was being that paranoid. I definitely didn't think my fearful reaction would invoke anger in him. "I'm sorry," I tried to apologize, but he rolled over then. Unsure what else to say, I laid down and tried to sleep. He fell asleep rather quickly, I could tell from his deep, even breathing. I tossed and turned for about an hour, my mind reeling, feeling nervous and uncomfortable. Finally, just as I was drifting off, I heard another sound. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I snapped awake, I realized it was a distant sound, that seemed like it was coming from the woods behind our cabin. It took me a minute to recognize it as a voice, repeating the same thing over and over. I couldn't make out what it was saying, except I think I heard the word, stop. What I did realize though, what sent shivers down my spine, was that the voice sounded eerily like Ryder's. It only happened about 3 times and then vanished. I was absolutely paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to wake up Ryder again because I was 1. Afraid of making him angrier, and what if he didn't believe me and thought I was just being paranoid again? And 2. I was honestly really fucking afraid at this point, and the thought of him going outside again filled me with anxious thoughts of harm coming to him. I decided the best thing I could do was lay awake and on guard, listening for danger, and if I heard something concrete, then I could wake Ryder. So I laid awake all night, playing Wi-Fi free games on my phone like solitaire, fighting my tired eyes. At last, when the stirrings of dawn began to light the edges of the curtains, I allowed myself to drift off to sleep. I woke up about 3 hours later to an empty cabin. I could see that Ryder had fixed himself a quick breakfast of toast and jam, the remnants sat out on the kitchen table. I pulled on my coat and boots, not bothering to change out of my plaid pajamas, and stepped out onto the porch. Ryder wasn't anywhere in sight, but there was a small fire going and some freshly chopped wood. I figured he was out gathering more. I turned around to go back inside, and that's when I saw it. The side of the cabin, covered in long, deep, fresh scratch marks. I don't know if I screamed or cried out, but suddenly I felt hands clutch my shoulders. I turned around ready to fight, but it was only Ryder, who had come up behind me. Fuck. Did I scare you? He asked, but although his voice sounded teasing, his face was stony and serious. Why didn't you wake me when you saw this? I gestured to the scratch marks. What? When I tell you my stomach dropped in that moment, I am not kidding. I felt a chill go through me. I couldn't believe he was acting like the scratches were no big deal. It's evidence that someone or something was on our porch last night. Seriously? The scratches, Ryder? I'm pretty sure those were there when we got here. Nothing new. I walked over to the wall and picked at the freshly chipping wood, and pointed to the shavings on the deck. I began to argue with him, but he first dismissed me, and then suddenly, that anger was back. I watched a chillingly dark look come over his face. I've never seen him look at me or anyone that way before. His teeth clenched as he moved his jaw side to side, boring holes into me with his eyes. Shut up, I'm getting really sick of you trying to ruin this vacation for us. Isn't anything I do good enough for you? What? I said, totally flabbergasted. I couldn't believe he feels that way. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm just scared. Guess this is what I get for thinking I could maybe just for once enjoy something I like with you. But no, it's always got to be about what the city girl likes and wants. You're so fucking high maintenance, you know that? Once again I was deeply wounded by his words, they cut to the bone. I really can't stress enough that he has never spoken to me like this before. He's always been sensitive and sweet. If he had these feelings of resentment, I don't know why he's been hiding them from me until now. Please, I'm sorry. I swear it's not like that. I'm just really freaked out. Could we at least maybe ride into town for the day? Town is at least a 35-minute drive from here. He bellowed, his face turning red with anger. I fell silent, my voice catching in my throat. I can't take your bullshit anymore. I'm going for a fucking walk. He hollered and grabbed the axe he'd been chopping wood with, before storming off down a path and into the woods. That was 2 hours ago now, and I've been sitting on the porch waiting for him to come back. I can't reach him by phone because, not only is there no service, but he left his in the cabin. What he did take, however, are the keys to his truck. I'm terrified that something could happen to him out there and I'd have no way to get help. I'm just stranded here, utterly trapped until he returns. I'm racked with anxiety, I can't eat and I feel sick. I'm writing this in hopes that someone can make sense of all this for me. Am I overreacting to what's happened here? Am I being a bad girlfriend and ruining the trip? What could have made those scratches on the side of the cabin? They're about 1 inch in width and there's 4 of them in a line, running down the side of the cabin. It reminds me of claw marks a little but deeper, and I don't think an animal would repeatedly run their claws in the same spot like that. But maybe I'm wrong? I don't know a ton about bears or anything like that. Please help if you can. I feel really scared and I don't know what to do. I'm going to sit here and just keep trying to get the page to load comments while I wait. I just hope Ryder comes back before nightfall, which is in about 8 hours, and that I can make it up to him and make him feel better. I don't know what I'll do if he's still so angry. Story 4, my hospital is covering something up. I only graduated nursing school a year ago, and I got a job right out of school working in the neonatal wing of a nearby hospital. I help mostly with delivering babies and taking care of them once they're born. 3 nights ago an ambulance brought in an unresponsive woman to the ICU. They'd found her wandering around the outskirts of the Indian reservation nearby. My state has over 20 Indian reservations. From what the other nurses have told me, the woman eventually sort of came around, enough for the doctors to tell that she was heavily in labor. So they brought her into our wing. She wasn't talking when they brought her in, and her eyes were really glassy, but she was about to burst. You should probably know that we get all sorts at the neonatal. We get druggies all the time, and they give birth to the most heartbreaking crack babies. Not going to lie, it makes me cry sometimes. We occasionally get mentally ill women in here, too. But the woman from 3 nights ago, I'd never seen something like that before. For a few seconds, it would seem like she was brain dead, then she'd be a little more responsive, then go back to being unresponsive. I helped prep her. From what I could tell she wasn't native, but Hispanic, so I have no idea what she was doing wandering out in the reservation. I'm Hispanic, and I guess I can see why sometimes people can't tell the difference between us and natives. But if you look at the eyes and the nose and the cheeks, lots of times you can tell. This woman didn't really have native eyes. I tried talking to her in Spanish, and she responded just as well, or poorly, as she did in English. So who knows? Eventually the OBGYN came around. This doctor is older and he's usually the nicest guy, but when we explained the situation to him and he saw this woman, he just sort of sighs and says, "I really hope this isn't what I think it is." He seemed scared. I'd never seen him like that. So we're trying to tell this woman to push, empuja, which she's only sort of occasionally doing. She's not yelling or screaming, she barely seems like she's conscious at all. All of a sudden, the baby starts crowning. The woman's eyes roll back into her head, and she just collapses. But the baby, I have never seen something come out so easily. It almost slid out. Only it wasn't a baby. This is what I was afraid of, the OBGYN says. I look into the OBGYN's hands, and he's holding this thing. I only saw it for a few seconds, but I'm not going to lie. I screamed. It was like a 2-foot-long grasshopper. That's the only thing I can think of to describe what that thing looked like. Its legs were long and segmented, and they were drooping over the doctor's arms. It had way too many eyes. Of course it was drenched in embryonic fluid, and the umbilical cord was thin and black. And it wasn't crying. The doctor cut the umbilical cord. The older nurses sort of hurried over to the doctor. He gave the thing to them and then they rushed it out of the room. The OBGYN and the other nurses started gathering around me. I was hyperventilating at this point, telling me that everything was all right. These sorts of things happened sometimes. The important thing was just to go about your work, and to not tell anybody. A few minutes later, the other nurses wheeled the woman out of the wing. After I finished my shift, I saw some of the nurses that had taken the thing away. The bottoms of their scrubs were covered in dirt. I didn't sleep that night after I got home. All I could see was that thing whenever I closed my eyes. The next day I went into work, and on a hunch I asked the secretary to look up some records for me. She couldn't find any record of there being an unresponsive woman giving birth at the hospital the previous night. I'm posting this here because I don't know what else to do. You can ask me any questions, but I'm not sure how good my answers are going to be. P.S. There's construction going on outside our hospital. And digging. I have a horrible feeling I know where the nurses put whatever that thing was. Story 5, I work at a nursing home with interesting characters. I'm a LPN at a nursing home. It's your usual home. People drop off their family members with dementia, Alzheimer's, or even general, simple health issues. Actually, it's almost disappointing how quick people are to get rid of family. Some families assume we're a hospital. But that's beside the point. You should hear the stories patients tell me, and I don't mean the sort of stories that make you think oh they just have Alzheimer's, they don't know what they're saying. I mean, we have patients that can tell us their past lives but can't tell us what they ate that morning. We also have patients that tell us extremely descriptive stories about other universes. But I'll get into that in another post. I started working here about 2 years ago. Even then, this place was a little off. I noticed as soon as I stepped foot in the building. I've never seen my boss or the owners, we've had the same employees since I started working, no more, no less. No one has quit, and no one has applied and successfully got a job. It's odd, I know. Every time I submit an applicant for processing, I never hear anything about it again. There's no communication between the LPNs and the CEO or even anyone from the government. The only form of communication we have is a new schedule in the break room every Monday morning. Good luck trying to call in, the phones are constantly dead. I've called repairmen out here before but no one has ever showed up, so I said fuck it and gave up. If anyone wants to get a hold of me, they have my number. When I walk into the building for the first time each morning, the first thing that hits me is the strong smell of sulfur. I've checked every corner of this damn building and found nothing, so I've learned to shrug it off. No one else seems to notice this. I've watched families' faces when they walk in to see if they smell it, and they don't. But the patients and employees do. If I ever figure out the source for the smell, I'll let you all know. Nanny, my personal favorite resident, has so many stories to tell. I could sit and listen to her talk for hours. She told me how she had 5 sons who she lost in war in what she calls Universe AB. I think she's also our most intriguing patient. Every Wednesday she has visitors. But they aren't normal, family visitors. They're deer. Yeah, deer. Each week it's the same family of deer. A baby girl with a brown spot on her nose, a mother with a tail that's at least 2 feet long, a father with antlers that scrape the door every time, and a baby boy that's completely black. Honestly, I didn't even know deer could be black. I think it's some sort of genetic defect. If you would like to hear the stories the residents tell me every day or the weird shit that goes on here, let me know, I have plenty. I'll change the patients' names or use nicknames though, confidentiality and all that. Story 6, The Concert. My vision came in blurry as I awoke from my drug-induced sleep. I heard a ringing in my ears and realized that it was from the concert last night. Woodstock, I thought as I sat up. I realized that I was still in the concert area, just sleeping next to a food tent that had the all-too-familiar smell of pot. Okay, so you popped a couple pills, mixed that with pot, then washed it all down with a few shots of tequila, super. Also explains the headache. You're such an idiot. You let your friends convince you into those pills. I'm not even 100% what they were. Anyways, time to find your friends. I reached for my phone and realized it wasn't in my pocket. Fuck, I thought. Now I have to look around to see if I can find my friends, while being unable to hear. I slowly got to my feet, my head throbbing, and started to slowly walk around. Jack, Dawson, Mary. I yelled out, hoping that they would be able to hear my calls. God, this is what life before cell phones was, I thought to myself. This is terrible, and the worst part is, I can't even borrow someone's phone, as I have no clue what their phone numbers are. I wandered around for a while, looking at the various booths with no luck. I then spotted 2 people dancing together and it was obvious that they were out of their minds on LSD. I figured that there was still no harm to see if they saw any of my friends, so I approached them. Excuse me, I was wondering if you've seen my friends? They continued to dance and completely ignored me. I asked again but got the same response. Dumbass stoners, I thought to myself. I looked around and saw someone walking in my direction with a finger in one of his ears, trying to clear it. I assumed that he was feeling the ill effects of standing close to a huge concert speaker. I approached him and said, "Excuse me, I was wondering if you've seen my friends anywhere." "Sorry man, I just woke up," he replied. "But if you're worried about them, check the medical tent or something." The medical tent, of course. I realized, thinking how dumb I was, that I hadn't checked there yet. "Thanks a lot man." I started to leave, then I turned around. "What's your name?" "Mark," he replied. "Well thanks for the help Mark." He gave me a small nod and I rushed to the medical tent. When I walked in, I saw so many people on beds, attached to 4s to get rehydrated. I saw a group of people around one bed. I approached and walked through the crowd to see what everyone was looking at. On the bed, connected to a flatlined heart monitor, was my dead body. I realized what the ringing in my ears was now and turned around. On the bed next to me, with a sheet getting pulled over his head, was Mark. Story 7, Don't send your kid to Little Valley Nursery. The pregnancy was hard. The labor was even harder. But I did it and I had my beautiful baby girl that we had wanted for so many years. I didn't love her at first sight, but that's okay, right? These things often take time, don't they? The months rolled by and it was time to start thinking about going back to work and deciding who would look after the baby during the day. I researched local nurseries and finally picked the perfect one. I called a couple of times, was happy with what I heard, and they invited me in to check them out in person. When I went for my visit, I couldn't have asked for anything better. The staff were amazingly friendly. The converted house was bright and cheerful and the other children there were laughing and playing together and generally having an amazing time. Looking back, perhaps it was a little too perfect. I would call them anytime I had a question or wanted clarification on anything. They'd always answer promptly and have the answer for me there and then. 2 staff even came to my house to properly meet the baby and have a bonding session so she wouldn't be too overwhelmed on her first day. They brought her books and toys too. Nothing seemed off and I felt much better about returning to work as I went to drop the baby off for her first day. On the way in, there were other parents there dropping off their snot monsters. I noticed one dad give me a strange look. He outright stared at me and the baby. It was a little unnerving, but I tried to ignore it and buzzed the security door. I got in, filled in the paperwork, gave an idea of her schedule, triple-checked her bag one more time to make sure there was milk and nappies and all the other crap a small human needs to survive one single day. Then I kissed her little head and walked out of the building. I cried the whole way to work. Work was uneventful. I decided to give the nursery a call later in the morning to check how the baby was doing, but they didn't answer. I thought nothing of it and decided to call again after my next meeting. When they didn't pick up again, I felt a little irritated but figured it was almost lunchtime and they had a lot of kids to sort out, so decided to go have a walk for the fresh air and to call them again after lunch. On the 5th call, they still hadn't talked to me, so I decided to leave a message asking them to call me as soon as possible. It got to 4 p.m. and I was so annoyed and a little anxious that I asked my boss if I could get out and go pick the baby up early. I broke a few speed limits getting back to the nursery, but what I saw when I got there made my blood run cold. The building, which just that morning had a big sign up, murals all over the walls and obviously had people in it and using it, was clearly empty. There were no lights on, cobwebs over the porch and even a couple of boarded up windows. I parked the car and got out to go and look closer. I smeared away some of the grime from the outside of the windows to peer in and saw it was just as empty and dusty inside. I couldn't breathe. What the hell was happening? My vision got blurry and I felt dizzy as my lungs refused to cooperate with my brain telling them desperately to take a breath. Suddenly my legs buckled and I started falling. The next thing I remembered was a group of concerned people standing over me, telling me to lie still and that an ambulance was here. I was numb. It felt like I couldn't move or even speak, but one of the onlookers said she keeps babbling about a baby and the old nursery behind us. What the hell did he mean, old nursery? I kept trying to explain I just dropped my baby off there this morning. Where the hell had she gone? The paramedic nodded and then spoke into his walkie that he was bringing in a possible psych case. Was that me he was talking about? I lost it then, which in hindsight wasn't the best argument for my sanity, screaming and shouting to go and look in my vehicle for her car seat, check my phone for pictures, go to my house to see the toys and the cot and all the other shit, hell, check my bank account for the payments I made to the damn nursery just last week. Hours later in the hospital, still no one believed me. They couldn't get hold of my husband, my phone had inexplicably developed some sort of virus and they couldn't retrieve any photos. My husband kept telling me to back them up somewhere. Why didn't I listen to him? So they admitted me to the psychiatric ward. I don't know what to think. What the hell happened to my baby? How did I make up a whole company, people and even other kids and parents? If there's no baby, how have I been on maternity leave for the last 8 months? Why is no one answering my questions? Someone has to know something, please, help me. Story 8, What do you see at mementomori.com? What do you see at mementomori.com? That was the title of the thread that led me to the site. I found it on an ancient forum that I discovered after falling down a rabbit hole of gore and videos of gruesome deaths. The title intrigued me, so I opened the thread. The ops post didn't give any more details, only a link to the website. I scrolled through the replies in the thread to see what I should expect. Most of the people replying said that the link didn't work and that all they were getting was an ad to buy up the domain. There were a few that actually saw something and demanded to know how the op had faked it. One of those comments stood out to me. I've seen it. Don't watch it. Knowing doesn't make it better. It doesn't matter. You can't change anything. That made me curious enough to click over to mementomori.com and see what would come up. I still don't know why it chose to show me anything. Maybe it was because I had been thinking about death lately. I wasn't suicidal. Whatever happens to me, I want you to know that. I work in an ER and that means seeing things most people try not to think about. I needed to desensitize myself. So, I started watching gore videos. I didn't enjoy watching people suffer, but I wanted to prepare myself for when I was face to face with the real thing. Maybe that's why the video started playing. Or maybe I was just unlucky. The video showed a man climbing up a cliffside. For a second, I thought it was my father, but then it zoomed in on the face, and I saw that it was me. I had grey hair and looked a little worse for wear, but it was definitely me. I was certain of that. I was the one climbing up that cliffside. I was the one who lost my footing and fell. It was my safety harness that snapped and sent me plunging to the ground below. The camera followed me down until I slammed into the rocks. Whoever was operating the camera was careful to get a close-up of my twisted limbs as I lay there. I screamed and screamed until my voice, or heart, gave out. My hands were shaking as I slammed my laptop shut. I fumbled a cigarette out of my pack, lit up, and started pacing around my small apartment. The video wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It had to be fake. The website had to have taken my picture with my webcam. Then they aged it up and plastered it onto a video that already existed. It didn't sound particularly rational, but it sounded plausible and that was what I needed. I slapped duct tape over my webcam and tried, but failed, to get some sleep. I almost managed to put the video out of my mind the next day. After all, it wasn't real, and even in the unlikely event that it was, then that meant I could avoid my death. I just wasn't going to take up rock climbing anytime soon. But I would be lying if I said I didn't keep replaying that final image in my head. I kept imagining how much pain a fall like that would leave me in and how long it would take for me to lose consciousness. I managed to last a few hours after getting home from work before I had to look at the video again. It wasn't that I wanted to see myself die. I just had to look. I had to find the proof that it was fake. Some special effect that would let me write the whole thing off as a hoax and get on with my life. I didn't find anything like that. The video had changed. Now it showed me getting struck by a car. Struck, not killed. I was very much alive when the driver sped off, leaving me to die alone on the deserted street. There were 8 minutes left in the video, But I didn't need to watch any more to know that I didn't survive. I tried showing the videos to friends and family. We watched as I was electrocuted, decapitated, and burned to death. Of course, they didn't see anything at all. The videos weren't meant for them. That was a few weeks ago. I kept watching the videos. I know I should have avoided them, but I couldn't. Every time I closed the laptop I would start thinking about what the next video would be like. Would my death be even more gruesome, or would I finally be given a peaceful end? Sometimes I could make it as long as 2 days before I gave in and started watching them again. I must have watched myself die over 100 times in 100 different ways. And each time the me in the video got younger and younger. That brings me to why I am writing this. I don't think I have much longer left. The latest video is filmed inside my apartment. The me in the video looks just like me, right down to the stains on my shirt. I haven't watched to the end, so I don't know how I die, but I've been thinking about the comments that led me to the site. It tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. I imagine if you've read this far then you're the same. You won't listen either, but it wouldn't feel right if I didn't try. Don't go looking for mementomori.com. Knowing about your death won't make it better. It doesn't matter what you do. No matter how hard you try, you can't change anything. Story 9, The Piano. I woke to the sound of heavy banging on my door. I jolted upright from the couch I had passed out on. Ever since I had gotten pregnant, I kept falling asleep in random places. I wasn't showing yet, but I pulled on a heavy sweatshirt anyway. I had always been self-conscious about my body. The banging got louder, it was incessant. The fuck? I mumbled, pushing my hair out of my face. I looked through the peephole to see who it was. I couldn't make it out at first. All I could see was what I assumed to be barely the top of somebody's head. Who is it? Kata. It was my little sister. I didn't know what to make of the situation. The last time I had seen her was at my medical school graduation. She had stood all the way in the back, wearing a black parka that swallowed her figure whole. She had raised her hand up in greeting as I received my diploma and then darted off without a word. She walked past me in a huff now, heading straight for the kitchen while mumbling to herself. She hadn't changed much. The hunchback she had developed from years of bending over the piano, her black parka, frizzy uncombed hair and the huge dark circles under her eyes. They were still all the same. Hey. Long time no see. I said under my breath, lamely. You got coffee? I don't have much time. I just have to explain some things to you and give you some stuff to hold on to while I'm away. She said in that sullen voice of hers. Away? I asked, perplexed. She hadn't left her house for years except to go get groceries. She didn't answer me. Her right hand spooned coffee into the machine while her left played a silent melody in the air. I watched her silently as she brewed the coffee, pulled out 2 mugs, poured some in each cup and slid one over to me on the countertop. I was 4 years old when Mama took me to a symphony. She said quietly, cupping her mug in both hands. She had been wearing protective gloves since her teenage years. What does that have to do with you going away? Where are you going? Why did you block my calls? Why do I always feel like my little sister hates me? I watched a pained look fleet across her sharp features. One hand immediately started doing trills in the air. It will all make sense once I explain. I just need you to promise that you will listen to the whole story without interrupting. I need you to understand why I did what I did. She said, almost pleading. All right. I murmured, all signs of anger leaving my body at once. The chagrin in her voice irked me. I wanted to hear what she had to say. Thank you, Elena. She took off her huge parka. Its inside pockets were filled with sheet music as usual, some pencils sticking out at the top and a piano wire poking out. She had always been skinny, but now she had become bony. Her skin looked almost translucent while she moved, mumbling to herself the whole time. I was 4 years old when Mama took me to the symphony. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I was in awe. I couldn't pry my eyes off of the stage. The sleek, black grand piano called to me. My fingers trembled to touch its black and white keys. Do you remember when we came home that night and I crawled into bed next to you? I told you I was going to be the best pianist in the world. I nodded, remembering every second like it was yesterday. I hadn't taken her very seriously at first because she was just a toddler, but the next day at the breakfast table she brought it up again. She wanted a piano. We weren't exactly a wealthy family. Our father told her we couldn't afford a new one, but he could ask his uncle for the one that was gathering dust in his living room. She was beaming for the rest of that day. I knew people wouldn't take me seriously, but I was convinced I would be the greatest pianist on earth. When I asked Papa for the piano and he said yes, I thought I had died and gone to heaven once again. I remember the day it arrived, how it didn't fit in the small living room at first, so Papa decided to take all the furniture out of the room. I had to sit on a stack of books on the stool to reach the keys. She smiled bitterly, reminiscing. What I remembered didn't make me smile. She had never been the same after that day. She had become so completely obsessed with that damn piano. She would forget to eat, drink and sleep and tinker away on that thing almost all day. That's also when she started talking to herself and becoming more and more distanced from the family. When she was 16, she applied to the most reputable music school in the country. She was accepted almost immediately. She had performed a sonata she had written herself at the age of 14 and stunned an entire auditorium into silence. Anyway, I knew this was the only thing I wanted to do until the day I died. So I learned, I practiced, I composed. That's when she started talking to me Eli. Her voice quivered. She hadn't called me Eli in years. She? I asked, very confused. Elegy, that's what I named her after we became friends. The piano. She spoke to me. At first it was very friendly. I started to spend so much of my time with her that I missed you. I decided to ask her if I could introduce you to, and maybe you could listen to us play sometimes. That's when she got hostile. She told me nobody wanted to hear my subpar melodies. She said I needed every single second I spent with her because it was the only way I could be good. She said she was sure that with this attitude I would fail. When I asked her why, she said that I was not to pay attention to distractions. I stopped talking to you altogether after that. I wanted to be great, you see? Her black eyes brimmed with tears. She shakily lifted the cup to her lips, gulping down the contents and immediately pouring herself some more. I was feeling very numb. I hadn't moved a single muscle as I listened to her talk to me about her talking piano. I remembered all the times I would one minute find her aggressively shaking her head, yelling no into thin air, and the next letting her fingers glide over the keys, playing magical melodies. I remember pleading with Father, telling him to take her to a doctor. She looked so sickly, acted in the strangest ways. Neither Mama nor Pa ever listened to me. They said that she was a genius, that it was normal for her to be a little bit off. Everything went downhill after I got into my dream school. You don't say. I thought, careful of my facial expression. Ma and Pa had to tell her that they couldn't afford the school she wanted to go to. They had both died within a year of that in a house fire. Mama and Papa had taken some heavy sleeping pills before bed. It was the only way they could sleep through my sister's incessant playing. Kata had woken up on the couch next to the piano, freaked out, and her first and only thought was about that piano. She never even gave a second thought to Mama and Papa. She forgot about them. They died in their sleep. The fireman had found her in hysterics. She had broken the window and was trying to drag her piano out. They tried to pull her away, but she was inconsolable. She screamed in agony as she watched her piano burn. Mama and Papa had died because she chose a goddamn piano over waking them up. I was plagued by nightmares when I found out I couldn't go. Elegy didn't just speak to me when I was playing anymore. She had told me to scrape off a small chunk of wood from her tail so she could be with me wherever I went. She sighed, pressing her eyeballs with her fingers. She continued, one night, I was in bed, having what I thought was a night terror. There was a woman standing at the foot of my bed, dressed head to toe in black. Her face was so pale, it was a ghostly white. I tried to wake up, but she spoke. She told me I was already awake. It was Elegy. I could see her now. Not only that, but she could control my limbs, telling me how useless I am and that I would be nothing without her. She was always there. I tried to tell Mama but she silenced me. I tried to quit playing but she controlled me, so I was completely powerless. One night, she told me to take out a spare piano wire. She told me to go into our parents' bedroom and I wouldn't do it. I was banging my head against the walls trying to get her out of my head. I was pleading, telling her to please take me instead. I saw Papa walking out of the bedroom. He seemed very groggy, he could barely walk properly. That's when she took over. I couldn't control my limbs. I watched as she used my body to sneak up behind him, wrap the cord around his neck, and she was pulling so hard that I could hear his throat crunching under the pressure. Once he was gone, she went into the bedroom and strangled Mama. I hadn't seen Papa's face as he died, but she made sure that I was straddling Mama, watching every second of life leaving her. Then I just remember standing outside with the fireman, yelling about LSG. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't think, I couldn't move, I couldn't make a sound. She looked at me imploringly. When I said nothing, she stood up. I will be gone for a long time. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. She mumbles. And damn right, I think, rage boiling up inside of me. I still can't move. My sheet music, will you please burn it? All of it. She emphasized. I didn't say anything, I was still too shocked. She walked out the way she came in, her hump visible now that her parka wasn't covering her. She clicked the door shut and I sat there. I just sat there for hours, trying to comprehend and failing. By the time that the sun rose again, I managed to get up out of my seat. That goddamn parka was still where she had left it, years of being worn and not being washed once. It looked extremely coarse. I was furious. I was going to give her the parka and tell her to burn it her goddamn self. Then I was going to call the police and turn her in. It was heavy as I stuffed it into a big duffel bag along with its crumpled contents. I drove way above the speed limit, thinking everything over in my head, tears streaming down my face. I came to a halt in front of her house. I was crying uncontrollably by this point. I banged my fist on her door repeatedly. No answer. I tried the doorknob and it was unlocked. I stormed inside expecting to find her sitting on that stool, like she always was. She was nowhere to be seen. She must have had left already. I threw the duffel bag on the floor. How could she commit such a heinous crime and get away with it? I was beyond furious. I kept pacing up and down the bare-floored main room. I was trying not to look at that fucking piano. I remembered that I had a shovel in my trunk. I had bought it ages ago because I needed a hobby and decided on gardening. I had been driving around with it in the back seat for 4 years. I rushed out and ripped the trunk open, forcefully grabbing the shovel. The rage boiled inside me. I ran back inside, the shovel raised above my head and struck the damn thing. Over and over I kept striking with the shovel, but other than a couple of small dents I couldn't cause damage. Fine, I thought, I will break it from the inside. I opened the heavy top and froze. What the fuck? It was Kata. She was curled up in the fetal position, completely naked. Her body was covered with old burn marks, her hands a completely different shade of white from the rest of her body because of the gloves she had been wearing for almost 2 decades. Her black eyes were lifeless, a piano wire was wrapped around her neck tightly, and that's when I heard her low chuckle, "She's next." I looked behind me and nobody was there. There was no way it was this damn piano speaking. Who is there? I half screamed, clutching my tiny pregnant belly. Suddenly the piano keys started moving on their own, playing Chopin's Funeral March. I bolted to the car, my pulse ringing in my ears. That night in bed, I had a nightmare. There was a woman dressed all in black, her face and hair were completely white, she smiled and I wanted to scream. Her teeth were black and white, like a keyboard. Her teeth moved up and down like piano keys as she spoke. She only said a single sentence: "She will be mine." ... Story 10, The chickens are acting strange lately. I recently landed on an office job after a bumpy job hunt. After graduating from the uni, instead of finding a full-time job, I toured around a couple of small jobs while trying to find my true self. Looking back right now, I don't even know what I meant by that. It all seemed so naive and ridiculous. After a full year of searching, I still had no idea of the possible whereabouts of my true self, but had a fairly good idea that the bills were piling up and would soon kill me with their tiny fangs. Moving back with my parents was not an option because of my stubborn ego, so one day I got shit drunk and enjoyed a great headache session the next day. On the third day, I started to look for full-time dull-ass jobs that could pay my bills. Eventually, I got this offer to work as an entry-level office worker. It was nothing fancy and was, in fact, every inch similar to the dull drag that had been horrifying me since my uni years. But I needed to keep a solid roof above my head, so I took it nevertheless. So at the age of 23, I became an office zombie. So much for my free artist true self lifestyle. My daily work was simple: collect the files sent to me by corporate researchers or anyone else, categorize and document them, then put those into the gigantic file room. It may not sound much, but what made all these boring procedures seem a bit unusual was the content of these documents. They were all stories of some weird stuff that anyone with a sensible mind would question their credibility. For now, I could only think that my boss liked this kind of strange stories so much that he or she would actually set up a company to collect them. As I don't recall signing an NDA on the strange stories, I think it'd be interesting to share some of the stories with you. Some files came to me with certain information redacted, others I'll choose to actively shield specific info when I figure it's the better thing to do. But in general, the stories I share will mainly be just what I receive in the first place. I hope you guys will enjoy them. Below is the story. The chickens are acting strange lately. They lived together in a fancy chicken coop built like a dream cottage on my uncle's farm. It really makes you think about what could possibly go wrong in your life when even the chicken's lifestyle has more class than you do. After I lost my job, I went to live with my uncle in the country for some time. My uncle owned a small farm, nothing fancy, just something the old man put together to enjoy his retirement. He had a couple of cows, 7 pigs, 13 chickens, and 1 German Shepherd, Wet Nose. I fucking love that dog. I used to play with that girl when I was younger, and my parents would still take me to visit my uncle. She took some time to finally recognize me when I moved in last month, but we have since built up our old-time companionship. I paid my uncle reasonable rent while helping him out on the farm, learning whatever bits of farm knowledge my amateur uncle could give me. After a week or two, I was given the responsibility of taking care of the chickens. Aside from the smelly animal smell that my urban nose found difficult to get used to, life in general could not be more peaceful. 2 days ago, my uncle drove to the town to buy some farm supplies and called to say that he had decided to stay with his old friends for a beer and poker night. He sounded like a happy parent who found a babysitter and could finally spend a night out of the house. I had little to object, really. It was just a night. It didn't mean that I have to spend the remaining years of my life with these animals. I wish things were that simple. That night I popped a beer for myself and spent the most of the night lying on the couch. It was a bliss to have the TV for myself, even though my uncle and I never fought over it. I was dozing off after my 3rd beer when I heard something outside of the house. You know, that kind of sound at night which was not loud at all, and was difficult to discern and describe, but had the capability of capturing your attention even when you were not really listening? It was exactly that kind of sound that woke me from my sleepy state. I stood at the living room window, shielded a small section of glass from the lamplight to avoid reflections, and looked out into the compound. There was nothing but darkness. I listened for a moment, but at that point could only hear the muted sound of the TV. Wet Nose was quiet, but for some reason I still felt a bit uneasy. If this were my own house, I probably would have just grunted and headed to bed. But I promised my uncle that I'd take care of things while he was gone, and I hated myself for my sense of responsibility. I grabbed a torch and went out through the front door. The porch light was on, so I had at least a few meters of visibility in front of the house. Out here the air was rather chilly, and my beer-heavy eyelids were lifted just a little bit. I swept the torch around and found Wet Nose standing in front of her kennel, probably waking up to see what I was up to, looking at me with her tail all wagging. "Hey girl, did I wake you?" Wagging. Noticed anything weird? More wagging. All right, I said, but was in fact not relaxed. Something kept tugging my mind. I checked the cows and pigs. Nothing unusual. But when I headed toward the chicken coop, the air around me felt somehow heavier. At first I couldn't register what caused the feeling, but the closer I got to the crazy-ass coop, the more uncomfortable I became. It was as if your whole body was screaming at you in silence that something was wrong. It was probably because of this strange feeling that I pointed my torchlight the other way rather than shooting the light straight through the small windows of the chicken coop. There were some soft rustling and clucking, but very soon the noise died down. Curious, I pointed my torch and shined the light into the chicken coop. Every chicken was looking at me. Every single chicken. I'm not gonna lie. I nearly shit my pants there and then. I shuddered and almost dropped my torch, but the first words that came rolling out of my mouth were, "What you looking at, you nuggets?" And then I proceeded to give them a face which I hope meant I'm gonna fry you all crispy. Man, do I regret that. Aside from all the shame that I felt a few seconds later after my sanity flooded back, I was pretty sure that the chicken understood my threat extremely well. I didn't even have a reason to believe this, but there was a primal hunch in my gut that I just couldn't think otherwise. So after I threw out those nasty words, the chickens made absolutely no fuss, but only continued to stare at me in collective silence. We kept like that for what felt like 100 years, and eventually I was stared down by those small and beady eyes. I humphed with contempt while leaving the chicken coop window, trying to salvage whatever pride was left. Then I ran like a chased rabbit back into the house without greeting Wet Nose on my way back. I bolted the door, dropped the blinds, turned off the TV, and went upstairs to play games on my phone until I was too tired to keep myself awake. When morning came, I was woken by my uncle asking why on earth did I drop the blinds and slept almost into noon. I mumbled something and was glad that my uncle took it as some apology about drinking. There was no way I was going to tell him that I was scared to death by the chickens. Everything seemed normal enough when I went to feed the chickens and clean up their coop. I collected the eggs and encountered nothing strange. It only bothered me slightly that the chickens seemed a bit quieter than usual, and I often felt that they were staring at me when I wasn't looking. I dismissed those thoughts thinking that I was just being paranoid. Last evening before I went to bed, I still lowered the blinds in my room. I used the guest room upstairs. I fell asleep rather easily since my uncle was also in the house and I felt some security in numbers. But at around 2 am I woke up to no particular reason and checked my phone. There was no message or call, so it wasn't the vibration that woke me. I scanned the room absent-mindedly with dreary eyes and was about to close them again when they fell upon the window. There was something behind the blinds and I could just barely see a small part of it through the space between the bottom of the blinds and the windowsill. Wanting to find out, I slowly got out of the bed and equally slowly lifted the blinds with my 2 fingers. 3 chickens were sitting outside of my window, staring at me. Story 11, they told me to charter a private plane. It'd be better than flying coach, they said. Jeremy died in LA. No one told me why, but I called him on June 8th, a Friday, and we talked for a few hours, catching up on our lives. I had planned to drive out to see him, and I rented a car for a visit in July. The travel bug had bitten me, I said. Infected me with the need to leave the East Coast, to leave my constantly changing city, my shifting city, my city too quick on the expanse with no real plan, my lovely city of ghosts, and just get out for a while. If the West Coast was good enough for Jeremy, it was good enough for me. When I called on Saturday to let him know that I had taken up stakes and was ready to go, to make good on one of those weird high school promises, that we would light for the territories of the already all-discovered world and carve out a name for ourselves, that we would take leave of our lives and make a new one together, 2 halves of a person made whole, I found out that I would always be missing something. That Jeremy had taken his own life shortly after we hung up. There was no note. Just an open window 4 feet from where he sat talking to me on the couch, and a 120-foot drop from the sill to where he hit the ground, talking to God. I guess he did end up lighting out for the territories. He just went a different way. 2. I met up with his father after the funeral. A few family members and close friends had been invited for post-burial drinks at Jeremy's favorite bar, the River. Paul? His dad looked up briefly before returning his gaze to the half-full glass of whiskey. Yeah, I sat beside him. The bartender looked at me and I motioned to the whiskey on the counter and gave the bartender a thumbs up. A glass appeared in front of me in short order. Nice of you to come out. I know you hate flying. Yeah. I wish, you know what, too many books have been written by people, about people, who wished they could have done, been, seen, tasted, touched, imbibed, imbued, sated, killed, written, eaten, fucked, and tried. I called Jeremy the night before. His dad finished his whiskey. I know. He called me after. Seemed so excited to see you. Said that you two were gonna open up a dry goods store in Billings, Montana? His dad's voice shook a little when he laughed. That's exactly what he said. His voice was music on the phone with me. A tuned piano playing a song. His words, the way he talked, Paul. I don't know. He loved you. You know that, right? I tasted fire as I knocked my whiskey back, letting it bleach my mouth and throat, feeling as it slid into my stomach and caused an explosion of comforting warmth. Yeah. I loved him. He know that? Jeremy's dad nodded. He did. I think you do, too. Did. Do, I said, motioning to my glass. It's not something that'll go away. He did know. I just don't think he knew he deserved it. You're a good man. Jeremy was lucky to know you. His father broke down into sobs. I saved my tears for when I was alone in my hotel room, staring at the wall. I think he took part of me with him when he died, something that I won't ever get back. And I hope it's the part of me he needed, the part of me he can use to light the way, wherever he went. My cries were glass, shattering against my teeth as I heaved. I tried to force all the feeling out of my body, to expel the pain that lit in all my limbs, and when all the air left me I tried to shut the door, to not let it back in. I held my empty lungs closed until they burned, too, and for the first time since standing on the grass in the graveyard, the color came back. My first true and real breath in a world without Jeremy. And that was that. 3. The plane taxied on the private runway, pulling up beside the golf cart that a very large man named Croce had driven from the entry gate to the tarmac. I had been silent and had been trying to, through sheer force of will, get him to stop talking. Didn't take. Croce had opinions, and it seemed very important that he express all of them in the 10-minute ride. A few of them were good. Most of them were bad. A choice selection were Croce's own brand of weird ginger ale, he said, is actually the worst soda you can drink, believe me. That's not real ginger they put in the mix. What is it? I don't think anyone rightly knows, Croce said, his eyes focusing on the horizon intently. Well, okay. I know very little about airplanes and how they function, except that the larger they are, the less I understand, therefore the larger they are, the less I like using them. My flight out had been on a commercial airliner, packed to the wings with seasoned flyers, but not me. I preferred to drive. On the flight, 2 melatonin and a slug of gin deep, I spoke to an older woman, Marcia, who too, disliked flying, that she used to knit before on flights to calm her nerves, but now she wasn't allowed to knit on the airplanes thanks to the Taliban, she said. So now she just thought about knitting. And that seemed to do work. I don't knit, I said. She laid out statistics about how much safer it was to fly than it was to cross the street on foot, how much safer it was to fly than it was to go to the pool, than it was to go to a restaurant that still allowed smoking. The conversation was, not to be too harsh a judge on anyone I don't know too well, extremely fucking boring, except for one tip she gave me. If it's the people that bother you, she said. It is, I interrupted. Then you can always charter a flight back. My husband used to charter flights all the time. Not exactly couch seating for 4, but the passenger area in the plane he hired out looked more like a living room than anything else. Seems smart, I said, making a mental note. Always found people to split the bill in the first-class lounge when his company would fly him around. Seems very smart. She reached into the underseat compartment and started rifling through her bag. After a few moments, she emerged with a pin, sliding it over. "That'll get you in. Don't you need this?" She shook her head. "No. Some of his friends may recognize me," she said. "I don't want that. And I don't have any need for mementos." I looked around. She was flying coach, and I could only imagine how pissed her husband might be if she had given away his first-class pin while he sat in first class. "Don't worry," she said. "He's not around. I shot him ages ago." "Oh. I managed. I told him one night he could either come home with lipstick on his collar or he could come home a little sloshed and slap me around, but not both. And? Fucker got too greedy. 4. There were 6 people on this chartered flight. Croce wasn't with us. It was me, a woman named Rebecca, my point of contact in the first-class lounge, a tall woman with a wry smile, dark hair, and a way with words, her husband, a 6.5-foot-tall, 300-pound behemoth of a pale bald man, Nicky, a large, bearded man named Dan who seemingly had no point of reference outside of the latest national cons and his award-winning beard. "The secret," he said, as we boarded, "is to wax the moustache, and use simple over-the-counter conditioner once or twice a week. Anything more than that, you'll dry out the ends and you get more of a lumberjack look." I thought the lumberjack look may be something you were going for, since it's a beard contest, I said, moving through the doorway and into the passenger area. Marcia, she who Merck's husbands, had been underselling how nice the layout was. 6 recliners, spaced apart, leather, all facing individual flat-screen TVs which would seem small, but were placed close enough to the recliners that there'd be no loss of image quality. There was a love seat in the back, and it looked like the galley was behind a door next to the rightmost armrest. "Yeah, maybe if I was entering into the lumberjack beard event," Dan said, appending a silent, "You stupid asshole," to his sentence, thinking that maybe I wouldn't pick up on it. "Hey, Dan," I said, "I know you find beards fascinating. And I think it's great that you want to talk about beards, and comics, and bacon. Right? But I find exactly none of those interesting. And the only reason I bought into this particular ride back east is because I didn't want to be in a crowd. I want to take 2 melatonin, try and wrap my head around aerodynamic lifting, and zone out. I just buried one of my old flames and I want to be left alone." Dan paused. "I'm sorry. How did she go?" "I bet it was cancer." "Was it cancer? LA is such a shit place to live." He jumped out of the window of his apartment and fell 12 stories. "No cancer. And he loved LA." Dan paused again. "Oh. I didn't realize. I'm in mourning, so please." "Right. Well, if any of these other assholes," he motioned to Rebecca, Nicky, and the pilot who just boarded, "give you any sort of guff about anything, you let me know. I'm your Huckleberry and I'll fight a motherfucker that tries to fight a motherfucker in mourning. The code word is Big Red. 5. The pilot went over the checklist with us a few times, advised that there would be one flight attendant who was tying one off in the crew area after a night out with Ye and Beyoncé, and advised that we would be arriving at our first destination for refueling in about 2 hours. We were to help ourselves to the drink and snacks. He went over the rules for the emergency door. We were not to open it once the plane was in motion, even if we saw a really cool bird outside, a question Dan had asked as a joke, to which I smirked and no one laughed. The in-flight movie was whatever the fuck we wanted it to be. Including, he said, a leak of the new Avengers flick, which he had gotten from a friend of a friend of a friend who'd played Elizabeth Olsen's wig stand-in and was now being chased by the Disney police and would probably be a fugitive for the rest of her life, but we should still try to enjoy it. I opted, instead, to sleep. I ran into Jeremy's dad at the bar in my dream. "Did you know he loved you?" his dad asked. And I couldn't answer. Maybe he didn't, his dad said, but he sure had the world fooled, didn't he? Things are about to get worse. Just for a little. You'll know when you're home. You just have to fight, Paul. You have to fight. That's when the glasses began to fall off the shelves, that's when the bottles hit the ground, the ashtray started to bounce, and I realized that we had hit massive turbulence. .6. Nothing to worry about, the captain said. Just hit a mild wind pocket. We'll keep our holding pattern for the next 15 before buzzing the tower again. They should have that spill cleaned up, and then it's wheels down. Drinks on me, the captain smiled into the mic. Not shots. Bottles. I wiped the sleep from my eyes, and turned to see Dan gripping his armrests. That's not turbulence, he barely whispered. We're almost out of fuel. How long was I out? 5 hours, he said. The new Avengers sucked, BTW. There was some sort of fuel spill on the runway and we've been in a holding pattern for 3 hours. Captain Mick said after this flyover we'll reroute to a fucking field to land and I'm just a tad nervous. That, and, he motioned to the front of the passenger area, where I could see Nicky's bald, liver-spotted head glistening. He went back to the crew area and when he came back to his seat there was blood on the side of his shirt. I don't. What? The flight attendant came out to check on us, said she would be back when my copy of the movie was over, and she fucking reeked of booze, but I haven't seen her in an hour and a half. I think maybe. You think Nicky did something? Dan shook his head. How am I supposed to know? Did Rebecca say anything? He shook his head again. No. But when Nicky got up to go to the back, she nodded at him. Like she knew something was. I unbuckled, and moved to the front of the plane, crouching down next to Rebecca. She pushed her hair behind her ear and looked at me. Hey, I haven't seen the flight attendant in a while so I'm going on a snack run. You and Nicky want anything? I'm good, and I think. Nicky looked up, his face slick with sweat, his eyes bouncing around in their socket. No. I'm good, he managed. I need to eat soon but I can hold out. I did talk to the lady, he coughed. I think she'd rather be left alone. Oh. If ever there were a time to ignore the wishes of a sweaty, bald, ill-tempered white man, it was now. 7. The galley was a mess. A fight had taken place. I knelt down, moving assorted paper plates and cups around, and eyeballing the jump seat against the far wall. The safety belt hadn't retracted, instead, it hung limply next to the armrest. On the ground sat a neck pillow, and a small unlabeled bottle, which I picked up assuming it as aspirin. I knocked a pill into my hand, too large, too yellow, a waxy coating covering the bead. If I had to guess, ecstasy. I stood, and turned to the bathroom door, and knocked. No response. I tried the handle, and the door swung open. Empty. That's when the light started to go, and Dan cried out from the passenger area. Big red. He screamed. 8. I burst forward, running squarely into his chest as he tried to rush into the galley past me. There's something wrong with Nicky. He whispered. The lights overhead flickered, casting half of the galley in darkness and half in light, in alternating order. When you say something wrong. Over Dan's shoulder, I saw Nicky stand up, his body unfolding like a metal chair that had been wrecked upon the body of a wrestler. His arms jerked as he stood, his head lolling to the side, back and forth, forward. His neck snapped, his head flying backwards, and as he leaned back, he set his eyes on me. Dark. Light. At his seat. Light. Dark. In the center of the room. Dark. Light. Arms outstretched, his sweater vest now splattered with crimson. Light. Dark. Reaching out. Fuck this. I braced myself on the door frame and brought a knee up to my chest, kicking out, striking Nicky square in the groin. His jaundiced eyes bulged, the vein in his forehead grew more pronounced, as he dropped to his knees. From a shelf just in the galley I grabbed a plastic tray and swung it across his face. I heard something that wasn't normally supposed to snap and he dropped onto his back. Out like a light. I stepped over the body and rushed to the cabin, the door stayed stuck shut. I knocked. Captain? We have a situation. You're telling me, he said, voice muffled. Runway isn't responding and I've had to reroute to a field and I'm completely out of cocaine. For fuck's sake. Get US on the ground as fast as you can. There's something wrong with Nicky. Jesus, this can't be happening on another one of my new, even less friendly patch of turbulence interrupted him. Majestically, I flew through the air. Less majestically, I hit the ceiling, or, I should really say, I stayed put and the plane lowered about 10 feet in 2 seconds, slamming me back to the ground. My vision blurred. I reached up and touched the back of my head. Blood. Fan-fucking-tastic. Now there were 2 Nickies clambering to their feet. I focused my eyes. False alarm. Just one crazy. Where was his? Oh, there she was. Or, most of Rebecca. She is still strapped into her seat, one of her arms missing, up to the elbow. Her face was white as a sheet, with a look on her face that just screamed, well, that figures. Nicky turned around to face me, throwing his head back, rolling his shoulders, and roaring. Except, his mouth was shut. Nicky charged at me, and I saw Dan charge at Nicky. I rolled out of the way as Nicky slammed into the cabin door and Dan slammed into Nicky, busting the door completely off its hinges. Both toppled inside. Get the fuck out. Pilot Mick cried. Dan apologized and moved, but Nicky wasn't hearing shit. And also he was caught on part of the door that stayed attached to the frame, a splinter piercing his shoulder. I was able to get a better look at him, now that he was slightly immobilized. His eyes were still yellow, but his pupils were huge, his nostrils flared like they were never going to get enough air, and his sweat ran off his shaved face in rivulets. Mouth closed, he roared again. If I didn't know any better, he seemed like he was rolling. Like he was drunk. Like he ate something bad. Someone bad. The fabric on his torso ripped, and Nicky pulled himself free, grabbing at his side, completely shredding the fabric. On his left flank, just above his hip, was a 10-inch circle with a line through the center. Nicky ran his fingers over the line, which reacted by pulsing, pulling apart, widening, opening, oozing slick wetness, displaying razor-sharp teeth. The fuck, Dan whispered. Nicky was hungry, I said. Couldn't wait to land. Nicky picked up part of the door and swung it down, cracking the fiberglass over Dan's head. Nicky knelt over him as I pulled myself up. Nicky picked up Dan's arm and brought it to the moor on his side, holding Dan's hand close, letting a thick black tongue extrude from the opening, tracing over Dan's knuckles. The mouth wasn't a fan, but it was hungry, the lips pulled back, and the mouth widened. While that foul scene played out, I had been at work, removing my shoes, tying the laces together, and creating a childish improvisation of a Ninja Turtle weapon. I just needed to maneuver the man with the mouth just a bit. I swung my shoes in a few tight circles before letting loose, striking the mouth. This time, the man cried out. I brought my elbow up, catching him on the chin, and ducked under his arm as he started to swing. I jumped onto his back and used the laces of my shoes as a fragile garrote, digging my knees into the small of his back and steering him best I could. Just a few more feet, and my foot slipped. His arm, which had been clutching hopelessly at my head, dropped down. He secured his fingers around my ankle, and in one motion brought my free foot to the mouth. Blinding pain and hot wetness shot from my foot. I felt the teeth saw into me, pulling apart skin, shredding bone, and leaving open air where my toes used to. I struck him in the back of the neck with my elbow. He spun around, and smartly started slamming me against the wall, once, twice, 3 times, before I lost my grip. But this was according to plan. Kind of. When in doubt, I thought, do what Jeremy would do. I reached over and grabbed the release handle on the emergency door and yanked. If it was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. A loud explosion, the sound of air being pulled around me, the feeling that I would soon be going with it as the handhold fell away. Nicky turned around, roared with both mouths. I roared back, my cries breaking like glass against my teeth, dove forward, and took him in a bear hug. Just had to throw him off balance. And it worked. I held him close as both our feet left the ground, and we began our rapid approach to the door, ETA to the ground just over 15 seconds. Thank you for flying with Cocaine Plane Airlines, and always remember to thank God for the miracle of flight. 9. Nicky's body pulled away from mine. A fraction of a second after I had exited the plane, my body jerked and I had somehow stopped my descent. The man with the mouth looked a little less confused. More scared, I'd say, as it began its final approach. The plane itself had started a rapid descent since I forced decompression, but didn't explain. I felt hands around my chest as I fell backward into the cabin. "If anyone gave you any trouble," Dan said, "you were supposed to say Big Red." I laid on top of him for a second. He had braced his feet against the emergency exit door frame, leaned out, grabbed me, and if I hadn't been so enamored by Newton's third, he would have reverse pile driven me with the intensity of his pull. The two forces equaled out, and instead, I had just dislocated my shoulder, which now, as the adrenaline started to fade, I could feel. I rolled myself away from Dan. Emergency oxygen bags danced around us. The captain, I could see, was rapidly motioning for us to fasten our seat belts. 10. He brought the plane down in a field, saw Rebecca, saw that Nikki had disembarked, saw half of a foot sticking out of the bottom of my jeans, saw a third of Dan's beard ripped off, both of us spattered in blood, looked at the galley, looked back at us, walked over to the emergency exit, jumped out, and vomited. The three of us walked through the field, towards the sounds of traffic, saying nothing. My arm and foot burned. I used a makeshift crutch made from a rolling suitcase. Dan broke the silence. "Gotta shave my beard now." "Yeah." He sighed. "I'm not crazy, but Nikki definitely ate the flight attendant, his wife's arm, and half of my foot." "Yeah. You were. You saved my life, you know that? It wasn't a fair fight." He was drunk off and on from the flight attendant. Dan paused. "You've had a bit of a week, haven't you?" "Yeah." "We finally reached the highway. You think we're in hell?" Dan asked. I stared at the road ahead of us, at the welcoming billboard. "No. I think I'm right where I'm supposed to be," I said, motioning to the sign. Dan stared at it a few seconds. "What's so important about Billings, Montana?" "Everything, I think," I said. "If it was good enough for Jeremy, it was good enough for me."